Hi and welcome back to The Library is Open, my darlings. So I hope you brought your library card, your 2020 library card, 2021. That was a Freudian slip, wasn't it? That should never be repeated. And welcome back to part 2 of 21 for 21, my most anticipated book releases of 2021. If you missed out on part 1, what are you doing? Go and watch it. Or don't, that's entirely up to you. But you will find that under my videos on my channel. And we're going to pick up where we left off with the 12th book that I am most looking forward to in 2021. So at the end of the last episode, we got to the middle of January, I think, because releases are coming thick and fast, which is actually not surprising because I think a lot of releases were delayed because of the circus, if you will, that was 2020. So we're probably going to see quite a lot of books coming out that maybe should have come out earlier, or some things might be delayed again. So it's going to be a whole thing. But the good news is that there's still a lot of really exciting literature coming out. So let's focus on that. So yeah, as I say, we got through 11 last time, so let's do another 10. So that brings us to 21 most anticipated releases. And let's kick off with book 12. So book 12 is the fourth in it's currently a quadrilogy, or it will be when this is released, but I'm not sure how many books there are going to be in the series. Not sure yet, so that will obviously expand as the author releases things. But this is The Mask Falling by Samantha Shannon, which is released on the 26th of the 1st. And as I said, this is the fourth book in the Bone Season series, which takes place in a sort of dystopian futuristic world where the government has ultimate control and has the major capital cities have been turned into what they call scions. So there's things like Scion London, so on and so forth, and there are the sort of law-abiding population, and then sort of underground there is the unnatural population, which is the word that is used for people who have specific powers, many of which relate to things like cartography or necromancy, and they're sort of ruthlessly hunted by the Scion representatives. And our main character in this series is called Paige, and she's a very powerful unnatural. She's a dream walker, I believe is the term. I need to refresh on this series before I pick up the new one. So she's literally able to enter the dreams of others, and in this book she has been taken to a safe house in the Scion Citadel of Paris, so what Paris formerly was, and there is a sort of why can't I speak? There's a definite sense of unrest in the world, and plans from the sort of dictatorship to exert their grip on the unnatural population, and it's very much a sort of classic battle between oppressed and oppressor. So I don't want to say too much more on that because it's not going to make a lot of sense if you haven't engaged with the series before, but I do absolutely recommend you check out the first book in the series, which is called The Bone Season. It's followed by The Mime Order and The Song Rising. I think that's the correct order. But anyway, so sorry for all that waffle, but it's very much... I think it's pitched as YA fantasy, but I think it's more adult than that. And it's published by Bloomsbury on the 26th of January, so definitely do check that out. It's a great series, and I really, really enjoy it. Not just because a lot of the influences of like the unnatural powers are relating to like Victorian mesmerism and stuff like that. There's quite a big Victorian influence on in terms of mediums and forecasting and so on and so forth. So I really, really enjoy that. So if you do too, could be a great series to check out. Okay, book 13, unlucky for some, hopefully not for us this year, is another new entry in the series, which I have talked about before on this channel, and it's another edition of the Dr. Ruth Galloway mysteries by Ellie Griffiths. Now, this is called The Nighthawks, and it releases on the 4th of February. A reminder that all these release dates are UK release dates. They may differ in other countries and territories. So, I love Dr. Ruth Galloway, who is a sort of professor of archaeology at the university, but she also has a complicated love life. But primarily, she's called in to help solve crimes when they need things like carbon dating and so on and so forth. It's a really fascinating series written in a sort of light but deceptively complex way. So I really, really enjoy that. And this book is about a group of metal detectorists called the Nighthawks, who are searching for a buried treasure when they find a body on the beach in Norfolk. At first, the police, our sort of main police presence in the series, DCI Nelson, thinks the dead man might be an asylum seeker, but he turns out to be a local boy. And Ruth sort of gets involved because she's interested in the treasure that the detectorists were looking for, which could be a hoard of Bronze Age weapons. Like, that's her sort of specialty. And then, then there's a second death, which suggests that sort of murder is afoot, as it were. And when the police are called to an apparent murder-suicide of a couple at the isolated Black Dog Farm, local legend kicks in, and that talks of the Black Shuck, which is a spectral hound that appears to people before they die. The police ignore this, even though the owner's suicide note includes the line, "He's buried in the garden," and when Ruth excavates, she finds the body of a giant dog. So this is quite interesting, isn't it? Because this is sort of does what this series does really well, which is blend elements of the potential supernatural, or at least the spiritual, with sort of real life crime detection, and with a host of really, really fun, interesting characters that are really very much enjoyable to read. So there we go. And that's published by Quercus, as I say, on the 4th of February. 14th book is a complete punt in the dark, because I have no idea what this is going to be like. It's just that the blurb hooked me. And this is called Into the Heartless Wood by Joanna Ruth Meyer, and it releases on the 15th of the 2nd, day after Valentine's Day. Here's the blurb. So deep in the woods lives a witch and her 8 tree siren daughters. For centuries they've harvested souls to feed the heartless tree, using its power to grow their ever-reaching kingdom. Owen Merrick lives at the edge of the forest, mapping the stars for the king in his father's observatory. For years he's resisted venturing over the garden wall, until one day he must enter the woods to find his missing sister. But one of the witch tree's siren daughters, Seren, decides to save his life instead of end it. Now, no matter how hard he tries, he can't stop thinking about her. Every night he goes into the wood to meet her, and their love for each other grows. Intrigue. But when the constellations shift, the stars foretell an inevitable war between the Witch Queen and the King. With Seren compelled to fight for her mother, and Owen forced to join the King's army, they are plunged into the heart of a conflict that seemingly no one can win. Ooh, exciting. That's published by Page Street Publishing. As I say, this is quite interesting, a little spin on the Romeo and Juliet trope. What attracted me to this is the idea of tree sirens and spirits and stuff like that. For some reason, that just really intrigues me. Not just because I'm quite a fan of mythology, generally speaking, but this seems like, although I've been reading a lot of like fae and fairy related fantasy lately, this feels like slightly different from that, and I am quite interested in like elemental spirits and spirituality and so on and so forth. So I think that could be quite interesting. Also, the cover's green, which is my favourite colour, and it looks beautiful. So that could be one to check out. Book 15 is, again, another one in a series, which I have mentioned very briefly on this channel before, and it does relate to the previous book, because it is set in a fairy kingdom, as it were. We're not talking about, like, nice Tinkerbelly type fairies here, though. This is, like, high fae, sex, blood, guts, adult language, all of that. And this is the 5th book in the Court of Rose and Thorns series by Sarah J. Maas. She's a very popular sort of adult fantasy author. This is called Court of Silver Flames, and it's released on the 16th of the 2nd, so just the day after the previous book. And this, our main character in the main series is Feyre, who is a human who ends up in Fairylands. I won't spoil that for you. and it's about how she balances life, love, and a brewing conflict that's happening between the various factions. And in this book, we get a sort of insight into her sister, one of her sisters who's left at home in the human realms, and this is kind of a little more about her story with the backdrop of the war that has erupted from the brewing tensions between factions sort of going on in the background. It's a really good series in terms of the mythology. It's quite sexy in places. I don't mean arousing, I mean sort of it's quite explicit in places, but not in a way that feels exploitative. Like, it does feel earned within the series, like the moments of intimacy and physical contacts and so on and so forth. It's not just like some sort of 50 Shades of Grey nonsense where they just throw it at you on the front page. You know, like, ooh, here's a sex toy. Because I don't like that. So that's published by Bloomsbury, and I do definitely recommend the first in the series. You would need to read the series in order if you wanted to appreciate it, but I do recommend it. Book 16. This sounds really interesting. This is another really random find that I just found, I think, on the Waterstones website when I was looking at their new and upcoming releases. And this is called Hot Stew by Fiona Mosley, or Mosley. I think it's Mosley. This releases on the 18th of March, and I think what hooked me into this was the start of the blurb, which says almost Dickensian in style and scope, which is nice. So this is her second novel, and it revolves around the inhabitants of a, Soho brothel and their determination to thwart a ruthless property developer. There's also a quote here which sort of explains the title, which relates to that in Tudor times, brothels in London tended to be south of the river in like Southwark, and before they sort of moved into like Soho, which is where we would sort of recognise as the place they were likely to be, and they were called stews, which I presume is to do with proximity to the river and so on and so forth. So this says, pungent, steamy, insatiable Soho, the only part of London that truly never sleeps. On a corner sits a large townhouse. This building hosts a teeming throng of rich and poor. Precious and Tabitha call the top floors their home, but it's under threat because its billionaire owner wants to kick the women out to build expensive restaurants and luxury flats. Men like Robert, who visit the brothel, will have to go elsewhere. Those like Cheryl, who sleep in the basement, will have to find somewhere else to hide after dark. But the women won't go quietly. Soho is their turf, and they're ready for a fight. That sounds wonderful, and I think that touches on a lot of really pertinent issues at the moment around like gentrification, class, and so on and so forth. And, sort of what we mean when we, revitalise areas. Do we actually just mean that we make them too expensive for poor people? Spoiler, yes. So I think that sounds really, really interesting, and like I say, it does sound like it's going to be multiple perspectives and stuff, so that sounds fascinating and socially engaged, can't say fairer. That's published by Hodder and Stoughton. Last couple now, so number 17, this sounds great. This is definitely YA, and this is by the wonderful Akala, who I think is just amazing. And this is his first in a magical realist series set in Shakespearean London. You've hooked me. And it's called The Dark Lady, released on the 16th of April. So this relates to the Dark Lady that Shakespeare references in his sonnets, never by name, only by the moniker The Dark Lady, as well as crafting an uncompromising picture of street life in Renaissance England. It says a pickpocket with an exceptional gift, a prisoner of extraordinary value, and an orphan haunted by dreams of a mysterious dark lady. So this is Akala's first novel in terms of fiction and so on and so forth. But he has written Natives, which is a fantastic read that tells you a lot about the history of racism and class in the ruins of empire. Definitely recommend that, and I will absolutely be picking up this one from Hatchet Children's Group, who published this. So marvellous. One for probably pitched at a slightly older audience, although my thoughts on this. Read whatever you want. If you're 72 and you like reading Noddy, good for you. I hope you enjoy it. This one is a multiple narrative sort of coalescing thing. Like there was one I talked about in my previous video, where it's like sort of multiple plot lines that all kind of link to one another, like Crash, Love Actually, so on and so forth. And this is called Everyone Dies Famous in a Small Town by Bonnie Sue Hitchcock, which is a mint name. And this releases on 20th of the 4th, and it's apparently a collection of short stories linked by towns in Alaska and the American West, perfectly capturing the experiences of young people living a frontier existence in the rural American West. Whether they're brought together by the spread of wildfire, by the priest who's moved from state to state, or by the hunt for a missing child, these incredible tales blaze with secrets, rage, and love. It's also described as a novel, so maybe it's short stories that contribute to a novel, or I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. But I do just quite fancy that. I love an interlinked series of plot lines, and I would like to know more about the teenage experience in rural areas of what we see as quite cityfied countries, I guess. And that's published by Faber and Faber. Okay, last three now. Number 19 is by Jennifer Saint, and it's called Ariadne, and it's out on the 29th of April, and it's a retelling of the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, putting Ariadne centre stage, which often doesn't happen in either Greek myth or Greek retellings, because Ariadne was the princess of Crete, and the daughter of King Minos, and she falls in love with Theseus, basically, but she has to sort of balance her love for him with betraying her king and country, and also, the sort of wrath of the gods, as it were. So I think it's going to be a lot about feminism and the role of women in classical mythology, and also about, sort of putting voices that have been hitherto hidden, because she's like a footnote unfairly in the Theseus myth as it's generally written, so putting her centre stage, as Madeline Miller did in things like Song of Achilles and Circe, and I'm very much here for that, and that's published by Headline Publishing Group. Okay, book 20, which is released on my birthday, 27th of May, don't buy me a present, is called Threadneedle by Carrie Thomas. And this is another sort of magical themed one set in London, which is about a world beneath the streets of London full of magic. The blurb says, Anna's aunt has always warned her of the dangers of magic. It twists, it knots, it has deadly consequences. Now Anna counts down the days to a ceremony that will bind her magic forever, until she meets Effie and Attis, who open her eyes to a London she never knew existed. Oh, this sounds good. A shop that sells memories, a secret library where the librarian feeds off words, a club where revellers lose themselves in a haze of spells. But as she's swept deeper into the world, Anna begins to wonder if her aunt was right all along. Is her magic a gift or a curse? Oh. I'm attracted by that, not just because it's released on my birthday and it has a beautiful cover with a sort of midnight sky with stars and stuff, which I'm a sucker for that, but also maybe it's the word needle, because I've got very heavily into the Great British Sewing Bee over this, second lockdown that we're now in, allegedly. So maybe that attracted me. Whatever it was, I fancy it and I'm into the idea. I wonder if fantasy is becoming more popular, particularly as our lives are increasingly more difficult to negotiate both literally and emotionally. I would think that there's some correlation there. So, did I mention it? That's by HarperCollins, and that's 27th of May, my birthday. And finally, last but not least, this is a thriller, I believe, and the 21st book for 21, well, the first half of the year anyway, and this is published on the 24th of June, and it's called The First Day of Spring by Nancy Tucker. And this really drew me in with the blurb. It says, Chrissy knows how to steal sweets from the shop without getting caught. The best hiding place for hide and seek, and the perfect wall for handstands. Now she has a new secret. It gives her a fizzing sherbet feeling in her belly. She doesn't get to feel power like this at home. 15 years later, Julia is working in a fish and chip shop and trying to mother her 5-year-old daughter. She's worried about affording food, school shoes, and that the social services are about to take Molly away. Then the phone calls begin, which Julia is too afraid to answer because it's clear the caller knows the truth about what happened 15 years ago. And it's time to face the truth. Is forgiveness and redemption ever possible for someone who has killed? That sounds brilliant, doesn't it? I really like the sound of that, and I'm wondering... I'm not going to spoil with what I think, but, I'm already sort of, brewing that away in my mind. I think that sounds fascinating. It's published by Cornerstone, and as I say, it's out the 24th of June. So there we go. Those are my the second half of my 21 for 21 for the first half of the year at least. When we get to July, or probably late June, I'll do another sort of projected one towards the end of the year. But just to give you some teasers of stuff that I'm interested in that are coming up. July has Animal by Lisa Taddeo, who wrote Three Women, which was a sort of non-fiction account of three women's true stories of... it's not strictly speaking this, but it would be classified under the sort of the Me Too movement, and this is her first fiction novel. In August, we have a book by Mona Awad called All's Well, which is about a teacher who's directing a production of All's Well That Ends Well, and also about how she copes with chronic pain, which I believe is somehow mixed up with that. I don't know quite how it all fits together, but it sounds fascinating. And finally, there will be another Ellie Griffiths, but not the Ruth Galloway series, the Brighton Mystery series, which is her other main sort of ongoing series about set in the 50s about a magician and his friend who is a police officer. And there's also a brand new Agatha Raisin, which obviously MC Beaton sadly passed away, but the baton has been passed to her collaborator R.W. Green, and currently I believe it's called Down the Hatch, so that's going to be something to look forward to. But full details in the next video of one of these, I think. So I hope you enjoyed that. Let me know, as before, if there's anything you're particularly looking forward to from this list, or indeed that wasn't on this list. What are you reading at the moment? Have your, do circumstances dictate what you want to read or engage with? They definitely do with me. Mood is a big thing. Sort of what genres are you enjoying? But for now, the library is officially closed, so put those library cards away somewhere safe and give your hands a good wash. Do take care of yourself, please. Drop me a comment. Give me a follow on social media if you fancy. The details are down below, as are all the accompanying information about the books in this video. Okay, so please be safe, be healthy, and be as merry as possible. I'd normally say that at Christmas, but let's try and bring it all year. Much love to you. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Mwah.